A bad and a blessed exchange. Is Christianity wishful thinking? Is atheism wishful thinking? Arguments can be made for both. Is Christianity just wishful thinking for those who cannot live with the fact that they must cease to exist someday? Or is atheism wishful thinking for those who cannot live with being accountable for their deeds before God? It is easy to be influenced by something other than objective evidence when judging what to believe. What you want to believe or would rather not believe can affect what evidence you might close your eyes to. These are, however, vital issues. Therefore, it is important that you get as much of the picture as possible. While there might be reasons for wanting to believe or not believe in God, there may be consequences that you have not considered yet, and that may outweigh the reasons why you are tempted to disregard some evidence. And what was feared by the opposite choice might be offset by something else. I'm not a mind reader, but based on what I myself could be attracted to in atheism, and have also gotten the impression that at least some atheists reject Christianity because of, is also that they do not like having to answer before God and having to deal with concepts such as sin, guilt, and punishment. If God does not exist, then there is no one to answer to, and you basically cannot talk about good and evil as something objective. That might sound good, then there's no one to judge you. But it also has consequences. This means firstly that nothing you do has any real value. If there's no good and evil, then what you do is neither good nor evil, and you basically cannot do anything good. One's action then has no objective value. Whether you acknowledge it or not, it means that life is, per definition, meaningless. It also means that concepts like beauty and love have no intrinsic value either. It may be possible to attach some value to it, but attributing value also becomes meaningless. It will just express some feeling that you have. It means reducing oneself to biological processes. What one does is then a result of biology alone. What is called logic and reason are just biological processes in the brain, and therefore not something that you can actually use to judge anything by. It also means that you are alone in the world with your worries. There is no solution to worries about tomorrow, about money, accidents, the future, your children, etc. Life is nothing but a coincidence, and you can't count on anything. It also means that when you die, you cease to exist. Thus the whole life becomes meaningless, pointless. You can die tonight, and then you cease to exist and you are no more. This can be an almost unimaginable thought. Finally, it means that the guilt and guilty conscience one might feel anyway, even if one does not believe that there is any objective morality, is not one with which one can go anywhere. You can try to convince yourself that you can forgive yourself, whatever that means. But since both the measure of right and wrong and the judge of that has been abolished, no one really has the authority to remove your guilt. Not everyone might find all these things problematic, but someone might consider some of them. You may have gotten rid of God, but it can be a bad exchange where you have been given meaninglessness, worry, hopelessness, and guilt that you can't get rid of instead. What about Christianity then? What I hear some people say is that they don't like being accountable to God, and all that talk about sin and guilt is something they wouldn't want. And Christianity does teach that God is angry about sin and threatens to punish those who have offended him. This may be the reason why some hope that Christianity is false and perhaps overlook evidence that it is true. But as already mentioned, it can be difficult to escape the feeling of guilt, even if you don't believe that God exists. You just can't get rid of the guilt because you deny the existence of the one who might be able to help you with that guilt. And that leads us to the second exchange, the good exchange, or as Martin Luther called it, the blessed exchange. For although Christianity speaks about guilt and sin and God's wrath and judgment on sin, it does so with a different purpose in mind, namely that our sin and guilt before God, by which we deserve the wrath of God and his judgment, can be exchanged for the righteousness and innocence of Jesus, because Jesus, the Son of God, lived a sinless, innocent life, and by suffering and dying paid for our sin and guilt. So Jesus received your sin and guilt, and we receive his righteousness and innocence. That happens through baptism, where we have been buried and raised with him, so that his death and resurrection are ours. To benefit from this baptism, however, we must believe in Jesus and believe in his promise of salvation in baptism. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 5:21 that he who knew no sin, God has made sin for us, so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. If we believe that, it also means that the other problems that atheism creates can be solved. Perhaps not all at once, but little by little. For if we believe in Jesus and if we are baptized into him, we have become children of God. Then we can trust God to take care of us both in life and for eternity. And then our lives have a purpose, for God has set us here to serve our neighbor in this life. Then our actions do in fact have value, and so does beauty and love. And our reason is more than biological processes if God exists. Then it ultimately has to do with God's wisdom. The bad exchange then is getting rid of God and receiving meaninglessness, hopelessness, and guilt that you can't get away from. And the good exchange is to believe in Jesus and thus exchange your sin and guilt for the righteousness of Christ and receive meaning and hope back from him.